you and Knievel were paired up and then
Yeah,
fist fights or whatever's going on there.
we're getting around to the back nine. That's when he threw his club on about the 14th hole and it flipped back. I could feel the wind from it go by my head. And I got really fried. And I went up to Evel. I just said, if you ever do that again, I'm going to take a divot right out of your forehead.
Evel Knievel inspired millions of us with his courage and perseverance. We're building a museum so you can relive those memories and be reinvigorated with that spirit of bravery.
My name is Evel Knievel. I'm a professional daredevil.
Along the way, we meet people involved in the life, the times, and the legacy of the King of Daredevils. Here with their stories is your host, Joe Friday.
And we are go. Hey, listeners, it's Joe from the Evel Knievel Museum, and this is the Thrill Show. And we have a fantastic guest today. Michael and Eddie Langert are joining us from Minnesota.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, so this is Eddie. This is Joe.
Glad to meet you.
Eddie, hello from the Evel Knievel Museum.
Oh, world, my son, Jeff,
connected.
in Las Vegas finished second yesterday in the Nevada Seniors Championship in the amateurs. And he played with Evel Knievel's son.
Yesterday?
Whoa.
Or-
Yesterday.
Yesterday. And
Oh my gosh, that's cool.
yeah,
Yeah. So he lives in Vegas?
Yes.
he lives in Vegas, yeah.
Great. That's where our museum is going to move. We've got a lot ahead of us in the coming months. We've restored the big red trailer that Knievel had and about a dozen motorcycles or so, all of his leathers and helmets and costumes, wardrobes that he wore. And we've got a lot to move, plus build a museum. Of course, the star of the show is Evel Knievel, and he's, well, not around. It's
Right.
fun to learn about his friends and his cohorts and his companions and what's going on in the 1970s and 80s around him. So I was hoping that we could talk about you for a few
Yeah.
minutes and how you got started and how you got this spark of entrepreneurship and sales experience. And then we can talk about the fateful day that you and Knievel were, apparently paired up and then
Yeah.
fist fights or whatever's going on there and eventually became friends. Eddie, I wanted to ask you about a famous story about you and Knievel and that relationship, but maybe we can go back to your younger days.
I love my job and I love the golf business. And I became a pro the week after I graduated from Lamar Tech in Beaumont, Texas in 1958. And I turned pro that week when I came home, and I became a teaching pro in Minneapolis here at Freedom's Fairways. And then went from there on to where I was a teaching pro at a very fine Jewish club here called Oak Ridge Country Club. And the pro there would play the tour every year. So we play the winter tour together. And I got a sponsor, and then I played the full tour that 1960. I was 56th on the money list.
Before you met Knievel, somebody came up with the innovative stainless steel faced golf club, right?
Yeah, the metal wood. Yeah.
Metal wood.
I took him out on the tour where I had played, and I knew these guys, and I was talking to Miller Barber. He's a good friend of mine. I played many rounds as a rabbit with him before he was so famous. And they said, what do you got now for me? A driving range club or something, because I used to make them out of metal so they'd last and everything at the driving range. And I said, no, I've got a innovation, Miller. I said, all I want you to do, I got 16 of these clubs, and I want you to try one. And that's so I can go back to McHenry, Illinois, where our company is, and to Gary Adams, who's the president, and tell him I had Miller Barber try it. And then there were a couple other stars there. And I said, just hit a few balls with it. So in those days, we had caddies that had practice bags of 100 or 200 balls in them. And they'd be out in the field, and Miller was hitting balls to his caddy with 3-woods, and he took one of these super spoons from me, and he hit it, and that caddy just watched it go over his head 30 yards, and he said, "What in the world?" He said, "What's the deal on these?" I said, "Well, Miller, that's the sad part for me right now. We have to charge 20% off of wholesale to the pros because we're just starting out. So it'd be $32.60, I think, $32.60 if you want one." Well, I think I had 16 of them, the first ones that had come in, and I said, "Let me go out there because I played with these guys and I can get them in their hands." And so I drove down through a storm from McHenry, Illinois.
That was in the early days, the very early days, where they were trying to struggle to get those clubs in the hands and have demo days where people could try them out because they believed so much in the performance of the club that was key to success. And so a very critical trade show event down in Florida every year, the annual PGA show, certainly in the early years of the company, they wrote a tremendous percentage of their annual business at that show. And Gary and Eddie were at that show down in Florida, getting ready for that show when they
It was held at Disney World.
and that's where they met Evil during one of those early year
Evil
trips to the show.
contacted Gary, and he said, "I want to get together. I got a proposal for you guys." He said, "You got to come over to Key Largo and meet me, you and Gary." So that's how it all started. And so we're at this Red Carpet Inn, and they're the most reasonable motel. So we drove over to Key Largo. We were in Kissimmee, Florida, in a little Red Carpet Inn. And I have guys come up and say, "Hey, I was at the Red Carpet Inn when you guys made your happening happen." And so every night at the Red Carpet Inn, they had a bar. And I went into the gal that was the manager, and I said, "Hey, we want to give a club away, one of these new metalwood clubs. And we do it at 10 o'clock and we fill your bar up." And she said, "Sounds great to me." So that's what we started doing. And every night, Gary came about 2 weeks later down. And that's when we drove over to Key Largo to meet Evil. And that's how it occurred. We met him and he said, "I have a proposal I want to put up for you guys." So after we go over to meet Evil, we have this day, and it ends up kind of great for us, but it was touchy there for a little while because he threw a club on about the 14th hole. And
There was 2 rounds you had with Evil, right?
we're there and we were gonna just meet him and talk, have a round with him. He was a one handicap at that time. He could really play. So he wanted to play, and I said, "Gary, we don't have any money. You came down and you got $20 or something, and I got 22." And Evil wanted to play a Nassau for $25. And I said, "Gary, we can't do that. $25 Nassau, it gets real costly with presses and everything." And so I said, "We don't want to do it." He said, "Oh, just let it go, let it go, let it go." So we let it go, and Gary made the bets, and they were more than we could afford. And so anyway, he's beaten the tar out of us. Evil is, both of us. Gary's about a 5'6" handicap, and Evil, he said, "Oh, I'll give you 5 shots. And what about Eddie?" He said, "I'll play you even." So we played, and of course we're losing, both of us. And we're getting around to the back 9. And that's when he threw his club on about the 14th hole, and it flipped back. I could feel the wind from it go by my head, and I got really fried. And I went up to Evil Langer going up, and I just said, "If you ever do that again, I'm going to take a divot right out of your forehead." I touched him and he just he didn't know what to do. Well, to make a long story short, he damn near lost every hole from there in. And he kept pressing and doubling up and everything, and it got out of hand. It got to $1,750. And Gary won $20 and I won around 1,750. And we took the carts, and I'll never forget that little trail, 100 yards over to the Big Red bus
Oh,
that he
yeah.
had. He opened that puppy up, he took out the purse, and he paid us. And so I was gonna try to thank him. He said, "Don't thank me." He said, "I've got reservations for you and Gary tonight at the hotel." He said, "I want a chance to get my money back." We said, "Okay." So we go in, we have a nice dinner, and we go, and we get to the course the next day. He said, "Well, okay." He said, "I'm gonna pay you for $1,751. And I'm gonna play you, Gary, for $55 or something." Anyway, it was so that if he won, he'd only win $5 or $10. So it was, really, he was trying to do everything he could to make us happy. So now we're have dinner and we're on the way home, and it's in the middle of the night because we have to drive across Florida from Largo to Kissimmee. And I said, "Hey, I got a great idea. Those special chicken wings that we could buy from a place there in Kissimmee." And we'd been buying a box of a dozen, and we'd split them up. And I said, "Hey, why don't we get a Wing It On tailor-made?" And I got back to the motel and I went into that bar manager and I said, "How about it?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "Why don't you get a big banner and hang it up on the side of the motel, say when you're gonna do this deal?" "Oh, it's Wednesday night." So we started out and we got the big
1,000
box.
chicken wings sponsored by Evel Knievel Gambling Winnings.
And so I went into the guy and I said, "Can you get me 1,000 chicken wings?" He said, "Can you pay for them?" He said, "If you can pay for them, I'll have them ready when you want them." I gave him the order. So we end up with 1,000 chicken wings and the boom box with Kenny Rogers music and everything right in front of our motel. And I had permission from the manager. And so we had our display out there of all the clubs, and they were guaranteed sale. If you buy it and you can't sell it, you can send it back and get full credit for it.
Mhm.
Well, that was the secret to the whole deal. And so we set our box up outside of the door, and we just wrote business like crazy. And we had a big jug of every kind of whiskey. We had bourbon and Canadian Club and vodka and everything. And the
And chicken
pros
wings.
loved it. So anyway, Evils was gonna help us. He said, "Hey, I'll come over. I'll wear my suit and I'll come over to Kissimmee during the show at Disney World." And he said, "I'll bring," and he said he'd bring about 100 pictures. Well, he bought about 300 pictures, autographed them all for these guys.
It was in his leathers, right?
Yeah, he had his suit on and he signed the
His
things.
leather, so his costume, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It was just wonderful. And all the pros, they valued these pictures of Evil, of course, autographed by him. And so we gave all those out. And that got us off on the right foot. And I got there, and the first guy I saw, I said, "Man, do I have something for you?" And his name is Joe Taylor. And he's from Virginia, and a great
Yeah.
player. So we became friends there, and I had him hit balls right out of the red carpet in off the grass there, just up. I had some balls and I just I said, "Just hit them up." And he hit them, and he's, "What are these gonna cost? $34.60. Thank
Yeah.
you very much." And that got it started. And there's 200 rooms in this red carpet. And they were all coming down to the bar every night. And because we were just a little company starting out, they gave us room 340 way in the back where the pros had to, it was like a par 4 to get to our room. But we had them trailing all the way, finding our room and writing orders for the Metalwoods at that show. And I think we sold about $2 or $3 million. Got us going. We had 42 chicken wings left the following morning when it was all over on 1,000 chicken wings. The guys loved it. And they'd come up to me, hey, I was at your party. I was at your party. Well, we got 16 of them, $32.60 from the pros in the Darrell survey that they take every week. It's a concise what's in their bags. We got 6 of the clubs played in the tournament that Saturday. And so that was a great step forward for us with the pros, you know, with them giving approval of it. And of course, it caught on right away. A Tour Spoon is what, it was a 13-degree 3-wood, and it was powerful, and you could knock it out of sight. I mean, it was with the 2-piece ball, with the Spalding top flight ball, you could hit it. I'm not exaggerating. You could go 50 yards further than with a 3-wood. We called it Pittsburgh Persimmon.
What a great name. Where did that name come from?
Well, it came from the golf pro in San Clemente public golf course out in California. And I got a list of all these sales in the whole United States, and he had about $5,000 worth of sales of that club already when we weren't really in business hardly. And so I just picked up the phone and I called him. His name was Alan Cook, and he was the pro at the San Clemente golf course in California, Southern Cal, just south of Camp Pendleton there. And he was really a cool guy. And I just called and introduced myself. And I said, hey, this is Eddie Langert. And I was from the Midwest. I was president of the Wisconsin PGA and everything. As soon as he knew I was a PGA member and everything, he relaxed. And I said, how in the world, Alan, do you sell all the Metalwoods that you do when they're such a brand new product? I said, how in the world do you sell so many of these things that quick? He said, I got that big board right out there where they walk in. It says Pittsburgh Persimmon, try it, you'll buy it. And so they leave their driver's license with it or a credit card, and they go out and play. And he said, if I get 50 people to do that, 48 of them buy it because it's really a new innovation. He came up with that name, and I said, Alan, I said, would you allow me to use that? Oh, he says, sure, run with it. Do the best you can. And that's what I mean by him being a great guy. And so I had his permission, and right away we put that right on into the mold at the casting house, Pittsburgh Persimmon, a real neat, with our advertising agency drew up a thing, put it right in the toe of the club the next week. And we sold a bunch of, it was dynamic what he did. He was genius. And so then later I gave him a trophy. And then here's a little background to this story. I gave him a trophy, Mr. Pittsburgh Persimmon. Thank you, from TaylorMade Golf. And he says, you know, I hate to tell you this. I was selling them so quick, I was running out. I took the head that was in the trophy and made a club out of it and sold it.
Oh my God.
I think that's kind of cute. His son is pro there. David, his son, is pro at that same course. It's a beautiful public course in San Clemente. But he was on our team from the first day, you know, because he could see it was a coming thing, and it was coming, and it was massive, and it just took off.
So the company shortly after that moved from McHenry, Illinois out to Carlsbad, California, a
Carlsbad.
suburb of San Diego. And that's when Eddie moved out to
Delmar.
Del Mar, California. So then later on, as they kept their friendship, he had Evil over to his house out in Del Mar.
So I said, now you come to the factory, we'll custom fit you to everything and get you going with a big staff bag and everything. So we had a good relationship, and then I had him to my house there in Del Mar. I lived in Del Mar at that time, and I had him to my house, and I cooked steaks on the grill for him. Yeah, and then I got a gorgeous picture. I asked Evil, this is interesting. I said, how could you possibly paint a picture that beautiful? He said, oh, he said, Eddie, he said, you know, I had 29 times I was in the hospital, and I broke every bone in my body just about. And so he said, I just thought about it, and I tried it, and that's how it came out. He said, I didn't know if I could or not, so I just tried it. He's got a bird in flight that's just, it's an awesome picture, especially for somebody that likes sports, you know. Oh, God.
Yeah, I
So
see that. I'm looking at it right now. It's got a pheasant maybe, and some birch trees there.
Yes,
Yeah. It's
he has a copy of it.
Oh, it's a duck in flight, yeah, in the birch trees and everything. And I couldn't believe that anybody could just paint something that didn't know how to paint. There wasn't an artist. He didn't know he was an artist, but he was a great artist.
Yeah.
And I cherish that picture that I have right here in my own living room. He was a different sort of a person. He had a good idea when we met, and he wanted to be a salesman for TaylorMade. I said, Evil, we love you. You've been great for us. You've got all these people down here at Key Largo playing with the club and everything. But I said, I've already hired 32 salesmen to cover the United States, and I'm going to give you a staff bag with custom fit clubs, the whole deal. We're happy to do that, but we can't give you a territory or anything, because the territories are gone with salesmen. They're going to earn their living that way. And then he understood after that.
Yeah.
And he was very cordial about meeting.
How hard was it to tell him no? He did a sensational one-off sales event for you and signed autographs, and you sold out of clubs, right?
Well,
He's asking, how hard was it to tell Evil? Evil was so instrumental in your success there, to have to look him in the eyes and say, sorry, we don't have a spot for you.
so then, of course, we came into that where I had already hired 32 salesmen from friends that Gary and I both had at TaylorMade. I think I told you it was awkward, because I said I've already hired these guys and committed to them. They're going to earn their living that way, being our 32 salesmen covering the whole United States. And I said, they're all as good as they come. I mean, they're really good. And they're, you know, they were perfect. They were all PGA guys and members of the PGA. Now they're all dying. And I read their obituaries in the PGA magazine. 2 of them died last month. Yeah. But anyway, they were just a grand group of guys that really could sell golf clubs. And so I was lucky to have them.
I was in college at the time, and I was working in the factory during the
Yeah.
early days. And in those days, I used to sneak away and just bring a brown bag lunch and eat it in my dad's office there. And about 10 or 12 years ago, Eddie and I had the pleasure of taking a tour of their new manufacturing facility out in Carlsbad. And we happened to pause and just take a breather in the cafeteria. And while we were sitting there, they had a scoreboard-like sign in the cafeteria, and it was rolling a message across: congratulations, TaylorMade employees, for $2 billion in sales for the first quarter. We looked at each other and said, we've come a long way from the bagged lunches in your office, haven't we? When we were selling 250,000 a year, and now they sell $2 billion in a quarter. So it was quite the journey. We just looked at each other and reflected, wow.
Yeah. And then let me get a thing in about Michael. He was just in college at that time, and I had him selling over the phone, which is a difficult thing. You got to have a skill to do that and a personality. And one of the executives in the board of directors said, I think you ought to hire him as the sales manager for the whole company. Anyway, that was a good sidelight because he just has a personality that can get along with the heavy hitters and talk their language over the telephone. And that was a skill that I even hate to try to sell over the phone like he did. But I'd have guys from Miami, big hitters, these kind of discount stores that were starting up at that time. They'd say, boy, your son, he can really sell. When I got my order in, I thought I'd ordered $1,000 worth of gloves and I got about $3,000 worth. Well, he said, I sold them all.
Yeah, good. Way to go, Michael. Good job. I grew up in a family business too, not like that, but more like the 250,000 rather than the 2 billion. But yeah, we've done it all. We've been on the shop floor and we've sold on the phone, and we're the ones that do the cold calls. And
Well, it's just great to see something grow that you put blood, sweat, and
Put your
tears
heart
into
into.
and put your heart into, and then to see it become a success. Of course, we had been removed from the company for 40 years, but it still was quite a day to look back and see that message scrolling across the big sign.
Yeah, I remember back in the old days, right in the beginning of TaylorMade, I went to the board of directors and I said, I have a chance to sign up Jan Stevenson. And I said, I called Lloyd's of London and I can insure a contract for her for 2 years. And it's $26,000 to cover it. It's insurance, that's all it is. Lloyd's of London wrote the policy. And it took me 2 weeks going back to 3 or 4 meetings with the board. And I said, she's right on the verge of becoming one of the outstanding stars in the world. And I finally got them to agree to the 26,000. And what it did, it paid her 50,000 if she won a major. And she won 2 of them that year. Then the next year I signed Curtis Strange, same type of a deal. And guess what he did? He just won the Open 2 years in a row. So I didn't have a hard time convincing the board to insure these things. But I remember that as one of the things that I sold them to the board. And then I remember waking up at 4:30 in the morning and my wife said, what are you doing? And I said, I just thought of a great name and I have to register them all with the lawyers tomorrow morning. And it was Tour Preferred. And they still use that on their ball. TP5 is what they have on the side of their golf ball today, TP5. And I remember getting up and writing that down so I wouldn't forget it at 4:30 in the morning. And the next morning at 9 o'clock, I was in the lawyer's office and I registered Tour Preferred. I've done a bunch of names with them, but that was the best one that we had fun with, you know.
yeah, it's funny how that stuff comes anytime. It doesn't come while you're working away, sweating and studying.
When you love your work, I don't feel like I ever had to go to work. One thing led to another. And I've had such a good life that I'm an old fuddy-duddy right now, sitting here up here in this snow outside and everything, but I've had a great life.
There's not a better person that could have happened to. Send us some of the snow for Christmas. We'll be ready,
Yeah.
but not until then.
Thanks a million.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, both. And
Thank you.
hope God blesses you with many peaceful days to come.
Best of luck with your venture, Joe. It was fun
Yeah,
to
it sounds
connect.
exciting.
Yep.
Sounds very exciting.
I hope you guys can make it out. Until then, happy landings.
Okay.
Likewise, take care.
Nice to have met you.
You too.
All right. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. It's our mission to preserve and present the legacy of Evel Knievel. So if you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or have a suggestion to improve our show, just drop us a line at joe@thrill.show.
Like, I just think the Evel Knievel way.
We leave you with the encouraging words from the book of Deuteronomy. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Until next time, happy landings.
You like to fly to the seat of your pants? This is where you belong.